Representative Michelle Lujan Grisham and the challenger for her first district seat, Mike Freese, faced off in our studio this week. We ran the debate last night, and if you missed it, you can watch it on our YouTube channel. Now, the two talked for an hour about their ideas for rebuilding New Mexico's economy, immigration reform, improving our bottom rankings on child well-being, responding to international threats, and other topics. We'll ask our line panelists this week to discuss the debate as well as the Attorney General's race. So, joining me at the table this week is Rob Nicoleski of the New Mexico Watchdog. We welcome back line regular Attorney Sophie Martin of the Duke City Fix. Yay, you're back with that. We welcome back this week Antoinette Cedillo Lopez, Executive Director of Enlace Comunitario. And I didn't do well with that name, but I'll try it again later. The line table is also pleased to have Stephen Spitz, host of New Mexico People, Places, and Ideas on KUNM. I'm a regular listener, and Steve, great for you being here. Now, Sophie, thanks. Your initial thoughts on the debate. Did Mr. Freese make a case, as it were, as a challenger about Ms. Lujan Grisham's performance in the first term of her time?
I don't really think that he did. I think what he did accomplish, though, was placing himself squarely in sort of the Republican establishment. Most of his answers were consistent, I think, with what one would expect to hear from a Republican candidate, and he handled most of them well. There were a couple of places, I thought, where he stumbled a little bit over what seemed to me to be, for him, more complex issues, and climate change is the big one that came out. You know, he has made a big part of his campaign biography the fact that he has a mathematics degree from MIT and works in technology, plans to champion scientists in the sciences. And it felt like he really fumbled that climate change question. He was asked a simple yes, no. Do you believe in the science behind climate change and that it is man-made? And we never really got a yes or a no.
Interesting on that point, Stephen, that Sophie just raised about the climate change. He did, in fact, however, say that there was some agreement from him that it was man-made. That was interesting, or caused by.
What do you?
He said the climate is warming.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. That's more accurate. The climate, that he admitted to, but
Right.
the big one, of course, was not.
But I really
open
agree
on
with
man-made.
Sophie that he kind of fumbled that, and he fumbled. I mean, I think the big thing he fumbled a few big things, which were, including undocumented immigrants. He really wasn't simpatico at all with regard to that.
Right.
Even the Dreamers, he said nothing about them. They should just not be allowed to work.
Right.
He fumbled the gun control issue. I mean,
And when you say fumble,
well, I think, to me, Mr. Freese came off as sort of a libertarian.
Okay.
And you can see that really. He has no problem with abortion rights. He has no problem with gay rights. I think it would be very possible to craft a libertarian message, and I sort of leave it to Rob to follow up on that. That's very attractive, and we've seen that with Marco Rubio. We've seen that with other people. So I think what he didn't do was endeavor to craft a libertarian message that most voters would find attractive, and instead really, hit into the teeth of the CD1 voters, which are, largely, I mean, it's a strongly Democratic district, and if all you're going to do is consolidate your base, like Sophie said, you're not going to win.
A good point there. That's it. I appreciate that point, Punch.
Yeah, I guess as the resident libertarian, I'll speak on that. I thought that stylistically, Mr. Freese seemed a little bit unfocused. It took him a while, sometimes 10 or 15 seconds to formulate what he was saying. If you're the underdog and you're behind in the polls, you've got to come right out of the gate. And in many ways, Sam Donaldson put Michelle Lujan Grisham on the spot more than Mr. Freese did.
I agree.
Especially when I thought one of the things, if I was writing a story about that debate, one of the things that jumped out at me was when Sam asked Michelle Lujan Grisham about whether or not she thought Barack Obama was doing a good job, and she said that depends on the issue.
Right.
I don't follow partisan politics, which kind of made a bell rung in my head there. And Mr. Freese may have had an opening there to jump in and say, look, you vote for him more than 90% of the time, and try to make this race a Barack Obama issue as well. So I think there were some missed opportunities there.
And staying with you for a second on that, interesting point there. It was not a referendum on her voting record this term? Because they haven't had many votes in Congress, first of all. But second of all, don't you just go there as a challenger? Isn't that your best ammunition? And I just heard none of it about her voting record from him.
Exactamundo.
Yeah, interesting. There you go. What jumped out at you with this debate?
Well, I thought that Congresswoman Lujan Grisham did a really good job of positioning herself in the middle.
Yes.
And that's what you need for this CD district. While it is heavily Democrat, it's not super progressive. And so she talked about herself as being part of a bipartisan group of women. She talked about the places in which she's compromised. And so there was a lot. I thought she did exactly what she needed to do in terms of positioning herself as not overly liberal, but right in the middle. And as you said, you don't win if you're just consolidating your base, but I also thought he turned people off. I was particularly offended by his immigrant response and referring at least 4 times to those people.
Gotcha.
I just thought he doesn't know the district.
Yeah. It's interesting, tone, body English, all these things count. It's all show business at a certain level.
You know, we talk about the advantage that incumbents have. They get press time for the years leading up to the election. They speak in a wide variety of environments. They have all of these things that help them to get reelected. And one of the things I think we don't talk about very much is they have the experience stumping for the, going for the vote, asking for the vote. And we really saw in this debate, I thought, the comfort that Michelle Lujan Grisham has in the environment, talking about policies, talking about Washington, about herself, a great deal of comfort there, and the relative lack of comfort from Mr. Freese. And that kind of comfort, it seems to me, comes from the training that you get on the campaign. And that is very difficult for a challenger, especially a first-time challenger, to bring that level of believable communications to what they're.
There's a reason there's debate prep in this world. And Stephen, interesting. Mr. Freese oftentimes would announce an answer with what he wasn't going to do, or what the question wasn't about. Well, I'm not in the state legislature. That's not in my purview. Or I'm not the governor, and that's not. You know what I mean? There's got to be a better way to say those kind of things right out of the gate than announcing what you're not going to be able to do.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think you need to be affirmative. You need to be comfortable. You need to say, this is what I believe that's appealing to other people.
Sure.
That wasn't done, and I really agree with what all the other panelists have said, particularly, what was said about Lujan Grisham. She's a vastly better candidate than she was the last time around.
Absolutely, yeah, you can really see that.
And Rob and Antoinette are absolutely right in what they said. I mean, when she says she's bipartisan, even though she may vote a lot with Democrats, and that's not challenged, well, what do you think as a voter?
That's right.
That must be true, right? And again, what Antoinette said, I mean, when you're referring to those people, that is a real sign to many of us that this is not a generous person. He could very well be a wonderful, generous person, but as you say in the debate prep, you need to be careful about your language, or you're going to lose a lot of people.
You've got to, if you're the underdog, you have to put the opponent, who's heavily favored, you got to put them on the defensive.
Right.
And there's a lot of issues that Democrats are vulnerable on, and that issue really wasn't pushed. Like, for example, on the immigration issue, he could have asked her, where exactly are you on the immigration issue? Should we have open borders? That's a real serious question, especially with this going on in Artesia.
Right.
And also with the whole Ebola issue. There's that whole issue about whether or not we should be letting people into the country at what kind of level. And that issue was never really pushed to the fore.
Please, go ahead.
I was just going to say, although that would have been, unfortunately, a politics of fear, and sometimes it works.
Right.
So I was actually glad that he didn't go there.
That's a point. Were you surprised, Antoinette, though, that he agreed at one point or found some way to like something about Barack Obama? Do you know what I mean? I had a party faithful, I was sitting there going, I don't think his party faithful are going to appreciate that too much. You know, it's
Well, except
interesting.
it was in the issue of going to war.
Yeah.
So if, and then the way he said, if he would ask for
Yeah,
it.
and the
And
thing
he
he liked
touched
the
on that a
most
little
was
bit,
that he was
though.
leaving office. I
Right, that's right,
this
too.
Is
That's right.
This is a district that Obama won 55-40.
But
The
beyond
fact that he's
that-
leaving office is not.
Yeah, but you're not going to
Yeah.
win if you're a Republican saying I love Barack Obama.
Beyond that, though, you know, he has a really fine line that he needs to walk in a district like this one
Yeah.
between feeding the party faithful, who, I mean, I know that folks can take the faithful for, you know, take advantage, not take advantage, can assume they'll get their vote, but he needs to be looking to the people who can be moved, and the people who can be moved can probably say, here's a policy that I liked.
Yeah.
And the people who can be moved probably have more nuanced, or let's say different priorities than the party faithful do.
Absolutely.
And
More
it's
nuanced is not what I
interesting.
meant
It's
to
interesting
say.
just
Yeah, no, I hear you.
what Sophie said earlier, the fact that, or maybe it was Stephen who was saying that he came out and said he was not opposed to gay marriage. I don't think
Right.
he said he was in favor. He said he wasn't opposed to it.
that's
He said the
And
train
that
has left the
this
station.
ship
Yeah,
is,
it's over,
yeah, this
he
train
said.
has left the station. So I think that shows you how fast this issue has moved.
That's right.
From one end of the spectrum to the other.
We have to wrap this up, but I'm wondering if for Republicans stumping as challengers, if staying away from social issues is now the marching orders as well, or if not staying away, softening
Well, I think
down
I
that
what
think,
they've
we're
been.
Heather
seeing
Wilson,
them-
I would say.
Well,
Think,
we're
you
also-
know, she's
yeah, we're-
very
Middle
of the
successful
road,
for
middle of the road.
middle of the
That's
road,
right.
independent thinker,
Emphasize
libertarian kinds
fiscal
of-
issues.
Exactly,
We're
right.
also seeing them try to turn some of those issues. So we see the I support contraception
That's right.
messaging coming from some Republicans,
right.
not necessarily here.
It's
but in
way
other
different than
countries.
2010, certainly, that's for sure. And you can go to the NewMexicoInFocus.org page to see the full CD1 debate that aired last night. Up next, I get a few surprises about my family history.